What happens when a theologian, and not just any theologian, but Natalie Wigg-Stevenson, one of my favorite conversations I've had on the podcast, what happens when a theologian has a dramatic brain injury? And who they are, how they think, how they find themselves in their body dramatically changes. What do they learn in the grieving, wrestling process of recovery? How does that change their understanding of embodiment, disability, the divine? What happens when there are different modalities that are a part of that healing and therapeutic journey? What happens when you become a psychonaut and decide to talk about that experience? Well, all that and more happens on this episode of Homebrewed Christianity. The first time Natalie came on the podcast, it was not only one of my favorite episodes of the podcast, recorded in lockdown, went on really long, and I loved every minute of it. But we had scheduled to get back together. The accident happened, and now it's happening with years in between. And this conversation was just as enjoyable, a mix of kind of profound, philosophical, nerdy stuff to deep personal experiences, and, a little conversation about psychedelics and faith and such. So I'm just saying, this one is worth enjoying, savoring even. And perhaps you could be that friend who shares a brew. Because a good brew is always a pleasant thing at the right time and situation, but a shared brew is even better. So if you dig this, share it with a friend, and I'll appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Big thanks to Natalie for coming on and sharing all that she did. Enjoy. All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Trip, and returning to the podcast is Natalie, who last time we were on, we not only talked about your book and an online resource for some alternative spiritual formation, but we ended up talking about our favorite children's text and singing Mo Williams. So it was a very popular episode. You were scheduled to come back on, and then you had an accident.
Yes.
And as someone who thinks theologically and is focused on the nature and function of embodiment in our exchange about what happened, both the injury, the recovery, and all that kind of stuff, I thought this would be fun. Let's talk about theology and embodiment when your body becomes transparently front of mind, after an injury. So maybe you can set up some of the story and such, and then we'll, think out loud.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me back. I think, I was scheduled to come back on, and then I was cleaning out a closet in my basement. I was having this intense moment of wanting to declutter the house, but trying to squeeze it between making the kids lunch and getting them to swimming lessons, and didn't bother to turn the light on inside the closet as I started to clean it out. And this would be my warning to everybody: always turn the lights on when you're cleaning something out, because I bashed my face off of a metal rod. I was quite lucky that the metal rod was poking out, and the end of it went directly between my two eyes, meaning that I kept both of my eyes. But I did get a concussion and have been in recovery from that for the last 2 years. It turned into long concussion. And so I very sadly had to add coming on this podcast with you, Trip, to the list of things I was canceling as I was trying to figure out how to get my brain working again. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there are other things a little more
No,
pressing.
This one was a bummer. This was a fun one. I got to take a bunch of stuff I didn't want to do off my schedule. I was not happy about this one.
Well, that story is just particular enough that I imagine most people who've had an accident where they thought, wow, that's a quarter of an inch from even worse. Have their story pop in their mind.
Yeah.
And we had a plumbing issue. They took out stairs, and I'm sweeping the stairs and just counted wrong. I didn't even look behind me. Lights are on, and I step to where there is no stair. I fall half a floor and somehow manage to just scrape the whole side of my face with the stair as I'm falling, as opposed to impacting head on.
Yeah.
And then I land on a cross beam, which, there are certain things in the middle of people's bodies when you land on a cross beam that lead to pain. And then I just rolled off, and I'm laying there thinking, am I dead?
Yes.
And this whole thing. And then if if there was no physical repercussions, your body now feels like your house after you come home and it was robbed. Like whatever normal about it, you go, no, actually, the next step could have a mystery in it where I'm on the ground in pain and everything still feels screwed up.
Yeah.
And that experience of the where something is so shocking just to your own embodiment that you have to like rediscover, relearn, or like you become aware of all these assumptions you're making about your integrated self is just a fascinating thing to think about. And it becomes transparent in those like moments that are just shocking.
I mean, I'm a theologian who works on embodiment and has thought about embodiment for decades now, really. And I guess I realized I haven't thought much about the mind, which seems ridiculous, but they're like all the categories as an embodied theologian that I had sort of degraded. It was like, no, I'm all about the body. We're cognitive. We overvalue the cognitive in our culture, blah, blah, blah. And then I lost my cognitive capacities, like in some pretty terrifying ways. My memory wasn't working. My word recall wasn't working. I developed a stutter. I couldn't talk how I was used to talking. I'd be in situations with people I knew well and could not bring their names to mind. I couldn't write. I lost my capacity to read. It was a really awful couple of years. And I became finally attuned to realizing the cognitive is incredibly important. And when you lose it, you realize just how important it is.
How did that kind of experience of these cognitive disabilities and transformations change your self-understanding? The nightmares I have of being alive, aware that I'm losing my cognitive ability or memories or stuff like that are the worst nightmares.
Yeah.
But being thrown into the midst of it and not knowing what recovery looks like, was Natalie different to Natalie in that process in ways you couldn't have anticipated?
Yeah, it's anyone in your audience who's had a concussion will be able to say each concussion is unique and each one takes a different path to healing. So it was a couple of days before I even realized I had a concussion. We had a busy weekend planned. We were having a rager of a party at our house that weekend. And so I just was rushing around trying to get everything ready. And then all of a sudden there were like 45 people in my house. And I realized I can't remember anyone's names. I feel like I want to cry the whole time. Like a lot of emotional dysregulation happens with a concussion. I couldn't see clearly. And it was like it took the whole of the party and the next day to realize I think something broken in my brain because I'm not perceiving things accurately. And that's when I went to the doctor. But then the post-concussive recovery has so many different steps to it of realizing what's not working, because you don't realize something's not working until you're in a situation where you're being asked to do that thing, essentially. And as like a mom of 3 kids with a demanding job, I just kept going and not recognizing just how broken my brain was until I would find myself in these situations where I would look around and realize I don't actually know what's happening right now. I know I was in the middle of a conversation, but it's everything about that conversation has all of a sudden disappeared and is no longer available to me. And then also the emotional dysregulation. And then I had physical symptoms as well that were, well, what happened over the course of the 2 years. So then I ended up going on a leave from work, a medical leave from work, and doing a whole range of pretty intense therapies. But then about 1.5 years into the recovery, I started developing just completely new random symptoms. And around October of last year, I was finding that my legs would stop working and I would leave the house and my legs would buckle and I would just have to sit down on the sidewalk. I wouldn't be able to walk. And that was the point where we realized you can have a really shitty long recovery from a concussion, but you shouldn't be acquiring new symptoms. So I got referred to a number of different neurologists and discovered I had what is called functional neurological disorder, where the mind-body connection goes completely haywire. And the brain is essentially trying to imprison the body by shutting it down slowly so that it doesn't have to really do anything in the world. So at that point, I was obviously, like, as you can imagine, pretty depressed. I had done a partial return to work. My first day back to teaching, I was reading my notes and just all of a sudden lost my capacity to read, could no longer understand that I was supposed to go from left to right, top to bottom. I could recognize letters and words, but I didn't know how to put them together. But these were all like tricks my mind was playing on me to get me out of these situations for reasons that I don't understand. It's a sort of a PTSD response, I guess. So yeah, my sense of self went through, I really wish I had I wish I'd come out of this wiser, having learned something really profound that I could share with people. It was just such a shit show of a roller coaster ride that like, I ended up getting a dog, which is something I vowed I would never do. I mean, I just made all these like super weird, and now I'm going to have this dog for like the next 15 years. I just made all these really weird decisions. But a few things sort of came to the fore. Like, I know I want to write, and I've not been spending enough time on that passion and that love. And when I lost the ability to write and had to relearn how to do it, I became aware of, why am I squandering? Why am I spending so much of my life not doing the things that I really love? Like the obvious lesson that one should get out of a debilitating illness, but also like, oh my gosh, why do I work so hard? It's just exhausting. I need to just like play some video games with my kids and relax for the afternoon, which is something I wasn't particularly good at before either. And so I've been trying to, as my mind has come back to me, which we can talk about in a second, how I pulled that move off. I'm learning now with this new mind how to retrain the patterns that were in play before the concussion and try to learn something from this like totally bananas diagnosis I've now been given. Because I still lose the feeling in my legs sometimes. This functional neurological disorder is going to be a lifelong sitch, but I know how to manage it now.
You mentioned the way in which your kind of identity in the classroom was difficult, right? That first time showing up and not knowing how the words are arranged, and that kind of wrestling with your identity. How did that play out for like the more intimate relationships, like as a parent, as a partner, friend, and such? Like you mentioned a party. I'm interested in how parents of three have ragers, unless the definition changes when you get older. But is this like inflatables and Jello shots for the adults? Like how's that work?
We call them midlife appropriate, kid-friendly ragers. So there's like, But it's just a lot of people in one space, maybe doing karaoke and dancing.
Yeah. My neighbors in Los Angeles, when we all had like young kids, we called them garagers, where all the dads would bring the baby monitors to the same garage.
Yep. Moms do that too. Yeah. We do it on the porch with a glass of wine. Yeah.
But when Natalie to Natalie is in fluctuation, and then those relationships that are most cherished, who are you, right, when you can't show up as the person you want to be, and you may not even know exactly who you can be? Like what did you learn about yourself and the role of relationships and what can be assumed or presumed in them? Did you come to value or cherish particular parts of relationships in different ways? Because I'm just thinking of, even when we have just like physical limits and we want to be present for our kids, right? Like you're tired, stressed, it's like, I don't have any more shits to give, and now my kid needs them.
Yeah.
And I've already given them away at work or given them doing this. Like, what did you discover in those other relationships as you're renegotiating your body and your mind and how they're related?
Yeah, early on in the process, I had one of my medical providers was going through the list of things I needed to do to get better. And I was like, how am I supposed to do that? I have 3 children. And she was like, yeah, in general, people with 3 kids don't recover from this. And it's like, that's the beginning. Your kids is a terrible thing to say to somebody. And it became, if I'm really honest, difficult in moments to see that my capacity to return to who I wanted to be was being impeded by the fact that I have 3 small children. And to keep being present to them through that is probably one of the hardest things I've really ever had to do. And I don't know how good a job I did of it. I mean, we had just come out of the pandemic, so all parents were pretty burned out, especially parents of young kids, I think, were burned out already. But that is why I scaled my work back so much, because I could see that this was not just potentially a trauma for me, but one for them as well. I think it must be terrifying for a child to see their parent all of a sudden get really, really sick. And it's a difficult one to explain as well. Like, Some days my brain's working, some days it's not. And that's the kind of volatility and inconsistency that children don't need. One of the huge sources of healing became play. I'm not good at children play, like dolls, imagination. Like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. I hate it. But there's something in play that does unleash like a health or healing inside the mind. And so I found falling into play with them was a place where we could both go together that would be good for both of us and nurture that relationship. But I think like what's all the parenting experts on Instagram say about repair being more important than not screwing it up in the first place. Like we learned to make apology a lot. I learned to apologize to them a lot, for sure. It was, yeah, it's hard to have enough energy to maintain that intimacy. It's hard for a spouse. I mean, I won't speak for my husband, but I think it's really hard to be a care provider for that long for somebody who you're used to having as a partner. And so my husband was kind of heroic in that regard, even though, we fought constantly for this whole period anyway. But yeah, just showing there were some really crucial moments where he was able to show up as an advocate when I wasn't able to advocate for myself medically. But long-term illness like that is taxing on a marriage for sure. I think I lost friends. That's a real sadness. Being trapped in your own mind or outside your own mind, maybe, is such a lonely place to be and really, really difficult to communicate to other people. Just like why I was angry and sad so much, not having access to clear thought, feeling like my mind was attacking me all the time. And so some friendships just kind of frittered away. And then others got really, really deep. I have a few friends who showed up and just sat. They knew. I became much more honest in my friendships. I'm already pretty honest, I think, but like all the more so. It's like someone might come over and I would have to say, I've got 30 minutes. I've hit my limit. I know you drove here, but I can only do 30 minutes today. I'm so sorry. And the friends who understood that and were able to be like, yeah, so, because I had to limit social activity. I might only be able to see one person a week. And yeah, if you've got 5 friends, it might take 10 weeks to see someone again. And so the friends who were like patient with me through that, or when I had to cancel last minute because I couldn't see clearly or had a migraine, or those friendships got so deep. I mean, I'll just say it. Sarah and Sam, thank you. I love you both so much. Those friendships became so transformative for me. And I think hopefully these lovely friends would say this, I hope I learned new ways to show up for them, because being that close to the brink of everything, of such a loss of self, just makes you like not bother with small talk, maybe. I'm a talker. I talk, as you can tell, a lot. And I think maybe I started listening better, even though I might not be totally tracking what's going on. I couldn't like get my thoughts together to speak as much. And I don't know. The friendships became more intimate. That's what I know.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, because there are parallels in the language you're using about the transformation of friendships that similar to the transformations of your experience of the divine that we talked about last time. Like of where both one's own limits and then maybe just the structural limits of knowing and stuff decenter, kind of the expectations. Originally, when I was having you back on, we were going to talk about the spiritual practices and stuff that you had developed kind of coming out of the work and things online. And as a theologian, are so much of, unlike the people that are in our classes that have to take us, theologians have a hard time differentiating their piety from their intellectual wrestling with the divine. Right? And that's it at the heart of your book. And so I wonder when the mental abilities that facilitated, right, that deep kind of attention that you have in reading and writing, or the kind of layers of abstract reflection that you describe, and that's really required for a lot of the spiritual practices that you develop for like the online module type thing. Like, how did your kind of engagement with the divine change when who you were embodied in that moment changed? Because I think part of my terror of being told, oh, you're slowly going to lose them, is thinking, well, I don't know if I know. Well, I might not be able to pray. Not because I couldn't string a few words together, but because for years, like, there was a kind of intellectual intimacy with, like, knowing I'm wrong, but I'm wrestling with ultimacy nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if that wasn't there, I would kind of like look in the mirror. I could just imagine looking in the mirror. Just, you can see how this is a nightmare for me. Of being like, yeah, you look like Tripp, but you're not Tripp as Tripp thinks Tripp is. And does the Tripp in front of me even know how to relate to a God that you thought you were relating to with the Tripp that you used to be? Does that make sense? Like,
It does. Yeah.
and I know other clergy that have had experiences like this and felt like, what do I do? Right? Like, and so I'm interested in someone who's always had that practical angle of their theology and making space for a thicker account of the spiritual life. What did you discover, wrestle with, and struggle with in that period?
Well, it wasn't lost on me that I had just written this book that is framed by diagnosing God with a cognitive impairment. Like, I remember when I first started writing the book, I was telling my dad about it, and he was like, "Ooh, aren't you scared God's going to get you?" And I was like, "No, I don't believe in that kind of God." And then I'm not going to say that God did it to me, but there were the darker moments where I was like, "Oh my gosh, did I really piss God off with that book? Is this my punishment?" But
It does
bracketing
make
that,
you think, what would be the premise of the next book? That if it is that effective, you're like,
yeah.
can you be a true Christian with an inexhaustible amount of wealth, life, health, and beauty? Like, if
Yes.
you started Job just at the end without any of the other stuff,
Yeah.
could you still be a person of faith? There's not a book on that.
Yeah, I think I'll write it.
You can write it into existence. You manifest.
Manna, that's what I'm gonna. What's that awful? The Promise. Is that what that book is?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna promise my way back to life. Yeah. So I was slated to go to Rome the week after the concussion happened. And my doctor was like, "You can't do it anymore." And I was like, "No, it's my dream. I've always wanted to go there. I was going there for work." And so I did massive concussion protocol for the first week, like dark room, stayed in bed, did all the things you're supposed to do, got assisted like in a wheelchair with headphones and eye mask and everything on through the airport to get to Rome. And then really was quite out of it in Rome. And Rome is like a wildly porous, if I can talk this way, kind of city. I mean, so much has happened there across millennia. I felt like I was walking through a bit of a spiritual playground. And this could have been my own state of altered consciousness for sure. I don't know where your listeners are on this kind of stuff, but like whether it's just like, I mean, I've heard other people say this about Rome. You go there and you can just feel the spirituality of the air, like thick with it. And I don't know if I was tapping into that on account of just that's what's there, or if it was my own mind was all kind of swirly. But in that first week there, I had some pretty profound spiritual experiences that were just wacky. I think the primary one was visiting Bernini's sculpture of Teresa of Avila in a small church off the beaten track and sitting and meditating and praying with St. Teresa, asking her to teach me how to love God, how she loves God. That was sort of my refrain in prayer in that church that afternoon. And I feel with hindsight, with all the woo-woo filled hindsight that I possess, deeply blessed by the strangeness of that week, because I think it buoyed me through the next 2 years. I think I shared with you last time, like part of writing Transgressive Devotion was this attempt to play with the interaction between sort of progressive intellectual views I'd taken on and the charismatic, more, for lack of a better word, woo-woo version of Christianity that I'd come out of, and sort of like return to being a progressive Christian who could speak in tongues, or just have these charismatic experiences of the divine. And so being in Rome and having these really intensely porous spiritual experiences kind of set up the next 2 years, I think. I say reading was lost to me. Reading became a very strange activity in that I would pretty much forget what I had read as soon as I read it, but I kept reading it. And so reading actually became pure. I had to read, if I read a novel, I had to read it really quickly because I would not be able to remember the next day what had happened. But that's a really weird way to read a novel. It's a really cool way to read a novel. Like you just feel like you're floating in it. And I think my spirituality became a little bit like that. And so there were moments at the absolute like pit of despair for what I had lost and not knowing if it would come back, that I would be sitting in church. I just remember this one Sunday, I think it was the week that I had decided finally to take a medical leave and to start like really taking on some more significant treatments for getting better. This like praise and worship song came on, That Now Always Slays Me. The band started doing it. And it's about God's sort of abiding faithfulness. And your goodness is running after. It's running after me. Is repeated again and again and again. And I was just standing there singing in the pew with just like ugly snot sob tears, like pouring down my face, feeling just like to the pit of my being, which I had become recently acquainted with. I don't think I had known pits of despair like I experienced during this process. Feeling the goodness of God then pouring into that place where the goodness of God has always been. It's not all been good. I think that I have lost versions of the faith that I held through this process. I think I've been released from versions of the faith I held, and I'm trying to figure out now how to piece it all back together, and I don't quite know yet. But there have been these moments, like in this church in Rome, like when a certain song comes on in church, in moments of prayer where I have felt the return of sort of a visceral, visual kind of prayer rather than a prayer made of words. I pray in images actually more than I pray in words. I have a really hard time finding words in prayer, but pictures I can construct. That was true before the brain injury, but I sort of don't even try so much with the words anymore. I know really what I need to do is like lie down on the floor and call out for the Spirit of God and see what happens. So the woo-woo has been upped for sure, because that seems to be the only place I'm finding God, or God is finding me these days.
Yeah. You know what's fascinating, when I was in Edinburgh, one of the big projects I was working on was about the scientific study of consciousness and kind of embodied mind, those kinds of things. And because of COVID, the labs that I was supposed to be working in got turned to COVID labs. You have all these precautions. So I'm now spending much more time having one-on-one conversations with people running research projects and hearing not just about whatever their particular project is, trying to, piece together a new theory of consciousness after a kind of a reductive materialist that one isn't working anymore, right? So it's fascinating how many of the people who aren't religious in any traditional sense have stories like you just described that problematize, because of their experience, a rather flat account of mind that then open them up experientially before they could even legitimate it to their intellectual self, right? That mind is kind of just a part of existence of sorts, right? And having conversations with, I can think of 3 different scientists who share a story and all make some similar kind of comment, like, well, after it I was more open to the woo, that you put it that way, but or just like, I knew there was more, there was something more going on than I could ever, discover empirically, or these limit statements, that the kind of knowing that they had trusted, there's another kind of knowing that the experience kind of calls them to, that now I have to engage the mystery in these different forms. And, you mentioned earlier that, throughout this process, there was that, there were different stages and different progress and turns and stuff. When you think of kind of the major hinge points, right, of going back to that experience of Rome while you're, struggling in recovery and doing different kinds of therapy and those kinds of things, how did kind of the mysterious invitation of that experience show up in, the year and a half following, as kind of energizing, maybe animating your kind of process to become Natalie in a new way?
I think the immediacy of the experience in Rome, like sitting in that church, asking for Teresa's intervention into the relationship I had with God to restructure my ways of praying. I felt it. I felt her intervention. And again, I don't know what your listeners think about saints. We can only say I met one, and I don't know what to do about that. But she became a friend. And the intervention there was so undeniable that I think over the course of the next couple of years, as it felt like I was spending most of my time cataloging what was broken or no longer working, or what capacities I had lost, and then working with different practitioners to regain those capacities, having had that immediate experience of something that was both of me and not of me, that was so deep and undeniable, kind of bolstered a sense of hope through it all, like not a promise that I would get better, not a promise I would get cured, but a promise that there is something connected to the divine inside me that is inescapable. But that maybe, and I say this so cautiously because I've come to embody a lot of things I don't believe or agree with. Like, I'm someone who like studies, teaches, and writes disability theology. So I know so many of my experiences are just like wrong according to the dominant narratives within that discipline. But I think things that maybe we really can only glimpse in sort of profound suffering. And there's an acute kind of suffering in thinking, I experienced an acute kind of suffering in thinking that I might not ever get my mind back. And I may have, at 45, begun the process of decline to the grave, rather than, like, I was at like sort of height of career kind of moment, like, to just like flip that on its head. It was a very particular kind of suffering. To lose all potential is a particular kind of suffering. But having in the midst of that these like strange moments of divine presence, I suppose this is, I mean, many days I'm just kind of annoyed by Christianity and, to be frank, God. But you're reminding me that God does show up. And that's really lovely when it happens. And I do have gratitude for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there you use two words I've heard it from other figures that in these interviews, of something that is both unexplainable and undeniable. And a very famous scientist, not theist at all, was like, it's weird to have something that is undeniable and unexplainable become an anchor for your self-understanding.
Yes.
And the kind of, he said it carried with it the kind of mysterium tremendum, of like Rudolf Otto's sense of like a kind of awe and such that is both like generates the fear in the not mean way of kind of fear, but also kind of demands a reverence. And he was like, I'd never had something demand a reverence I couldn't explain before.
Yeah.
And I can't deny it. And it just made me different. And I like, it resonates so much with it. And it's in a new book of his. I'm not supposed to say his name but I'll send you the book.
Okay, please do.
Okay. But so like that.
But can I say one thing about that though? Like, because I think that it's embarrassing to admit that I might not be quite that profound, because I experience it, that state of reverence and awe. I kind of I experience it as like, just like awkward and weird and annoying. It's like, seriously, God? Like, I super appreciate the fact that I'm sobbing in your presence right now, but you're showing up in a bunch of ways that like really are messing with the theological categories that I have structured quite carefully to live my life by. So again, big gratitude, but I feel like I should probably be more falling to the ground in awe and wonder at holiness. But I am constituted to more be like, come on now, man, what the hell? Like, now I got to go figure that one out. Which just
clearly you need a liturgy after this called, I really appreciate this, but.
What the hell, man? Do I have to work on that now too? Like, and that does seem, I think my faith maybe is just shaped by like dumb humor more than anything else. But I do frequently, the moments of awe just feel like weird and awkward and embarrassing to me.
So you mentioned both like kind of working in theology and disability stuff before, and then having this experience where the categories in thinking about an experience that hadn't been yours in that kind of way before get problematized. Can you kind of,
Sure.
tell some of your narrative to help both like kind of introduce what you were expecting and then how your experience sent you on a different kind of path.
Yeah, I think, within disability theology, for really important reasons, there's been a strong critique and pushback against the ways healing narratives have been used to shame or deny the full humanity of people living with different kinds of disabilities, cognitive, physical, chronic illness, neurodivergence. And so within disability theology, there's a lot of moves towards kind of reclaiming and centralizing the experiences of people with disabilities as the foundation for theological reflection and construction, really putting aside the idea that cure especially, but also healing is required for wholeness. And I 100% intellectually agree with that and would teach it. And I'm fairly opposed to, healing services in churches and stuff for that reason. And then I got really desperate and went to this woman in my church who performs healings because I was like, no, I just want my brain to work again against all these things I believe intellectually. I'd like to be able to use my brain again to think about them intellectually. So I tapped out all the medical establishment and I went to a spiritual healer, like a Christian charismatic praying person who prayed on me. And I had kind of a profound experience with her. And then also a bunch of things that were very difficult about that and problematic that the disability theology is trying to undo, but nevertheless also had a kind of a healing experience. And so I think it's been a 2-year and probably now will be a lifelong exercise in trying to figure out how these things can be side by side. How can I see a healer viscerally experience healing while also really wanting to resist the whole narrative that's being put around that healing because of the ways it's so shameful and damaging. I can't now I've said this out loud and now what if my students listen to this and know that I'm teaching them in the classroom.
but you're also just being transparently honest and vulnerable, which
I know,
considering how many us have trouble doing that in the classroom, I couldn't imagine it being a negative thing.
My students have been incredible through this whole process. I was fully open with them about my broken brain. They took breaks. They waited with me when the words were gone. That's the other one, thanks to the amazing students.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So for individuals that would have loved your book but never had the charismatic part of their upbringing, look, you have a chapter in your book going back to penal substitutionary atonement and playing with that. That was uncomfortable enough for me. Going to a healer.
I know.
Oddly enough, because we're gonna get to to the psychedelic experience in a minute. That one,
is that your warning?
Is coded. That one's coded for progressive theologians going, I can do psychedelics. And I bet if we surveyed AAR, the American Academy of Religion, and you tell them you have an either or here.
And they'll both work the same effectively.
Charismatic healer with whatever confessional language you need for your own religious tradition, or psychedelics. Which one are you going to first? I'm going to guess the ratio there is going to be around 70-30.
Yeah.
And towards the psychedelics.
Oh, yeah. I think 80-20.
Well, see those SBL people.
Yeah. You think they'll tip more towards the healers?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I never really go to the SBL side of the.
You should do it once a year. Just
I can't even do AAR SBL once a year.
No, you got to say to yourself, you feel good when you go in to hang out with the biblical scholars, because as odd as the fashion choices are for just religious studies and philosophy of religion and theology and stuff, the SBL, they don't even have to have a wardrobe explanation for 90% of them to have the outfits. They're just you walk in and you just go, oh, yeah, I could have never been a biblical scholar.
I'll be excited. I'll go check that out.
Yeah,
is this a compliment or an insult? I can't tell.
Well, they would take it as a compliment.
Okay.
They're thinking, they think I walk around AAR. Why are there so many weird patterns over there? Who matches their tie and their handkerchief and their socks in flamboyant colors. You know,
What about his
religious
dapper?
studies. Yes, religious studies.
Oh, religious
professors.
studies.
Like if you wrote 600 pages on Titus, then no tweed. But sorry, but
Yeah.
but maybe take us into that experience of not just that the bit you shared there about deciding to do it, but what was the experience like saying yes and opening yourself up to something that was a part of your past, and with this right self-critical thought here going, wow, I hope she never gets to hear my disability theology lecture because she might be concerned about me.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, she was, I need to frame this with how much love I have for the person who I saw, but and I think it's just the depth of desperation, and that critical mind was a bit damaged and became a much quieter voice in my head because I was pretty desperate. And to be able to think again, but also, like I said, like to be able to emotionally self-regulate again. I mean, that was very, very difficult. So I think there were moments, like I say, in worship where I felt the presence of God because I was so close to the bone of existence. I mean, another place I've experienced this is in walking the Camino de Santiago. So like not suffering, but like just living close to the bone in forms of simplicity that we don't really experience in modern life. God can break through, I think, in those moments more. And so I felt nudged towards this person who has some healing capacities. And it's not a route that I have taken for many decades, if ever. But in my teens, I was sort of more Pentecostally inclined in terms of my spiritual practice. Like I would attend the Toronto Airport Church. I don't know if you know that church, like a vineyard kind of church. And what I love about that world is the timelessness of it. A church service might go on for 6 hours. Like nobody cares when it starts and finishes. You're just in God's time. And that's, I work with like disability time and queer time in my thinking and my writing. And it's surprisingly resonant with charismatic time in terms of like eternity. We're on God's clock here. And there's a kind of timelessness that comes in with a brain injury as well. And I think I was sort of hungry for that. And so, or I was hungry for experiencing that in a more positive way than just like feeling like I was losing chunks of time. And so I felt this sort of breakthrough of the divine saying like, you could have someone pray for you. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be scared of. Like, why not? You're doing so many kooky therapies at this point to try to get better. Like having things moved around in my head. I was doing neurofeedback. I was playing video games with my mind, not my hands. Like in neurofeedback, I don't know if you know about that treatment. That's a bananas one where you're like retraining your neural pathways. You're not holding a controller in your hands. You're looking at a screen. It's hooked up to your brain and your brain is playing the video game. Like I was doing some out there experimental stuff and then I wasn't going to let someone prey on me. It just seemed silly not to. Yeah. And the desperation, I guess, gave me over to it. The critical mind, clicks back in then when someone starts narrating to me, the things I need to stop doing or start doing on account of to stay well. That's when the shame can kick in. But I do feel that was one of the mysterious turning points in the healing journey. And I think, I'd be curious to know what your science friends would say about this. Like the mind is such an incredibly strange thing with these depths that we have no access to, but somehow are always present. And it can be set on paths of healing. There were a number of treatments I did that would work for a while and then stop, and people would be like, oh, well, it was just a placebo. And it's like, right, no, I think in these strange altered mind states, placebos are what we need. If something's going to trick my mind into generating new neural pathways that will be beneficial to me rather than harmful, then placebo away, please. I'll take whatever placebo you've got.
And I would say, like, one of the things that shows up in a lot of the cognitive sciences, thinking about even the placebo effect, right? When we say placebo effect, the placebo effect is based on an assumption that all the causal elements of an experience are something one can assess empirically, right? So And it is a explanation. It's giving an empirical label to something where the non-material elements at play and the psychological disposition and expectations of those participating make things available and becoming actual that don't have kind of causal efficiency as the best explanation. So we're putting them in a bucket and we're calling it placebo, right? And so there are philosophers of science that find the use of placebo fascinating, and then you might make a taxonomy of it, like what are. But the moment you have different kinds of causation than just efficient ones that have material explanations, then what are the various parts of it, right? And that's been something that's a part of kind of the science-religion dialogue since someone like, William James and Varieties of Religious Experience start to lay it out. And there's been kind of a growing awareness in a number of fields that the Enlightenment dominance of the academy and the way it explains the world isn't the only one, right? So you get like the anthropological turn, the ontological turn in anthropology, where like something like how forests think, a book looking at how a completely different culture, the orientation of their whole mind in relating to nature is different because it wasn't formed to read text. So they read, right, nature and communication that we are mute to because our brain, because we're literate, doesn't attend to it. And, a host of other elements.
This has been that soapbox, so my work is at the intersection of ethnography and theology. And in my community of ethnographic theologians, I've been saying for years, anthropologists are doing way kookier spiritual stuff than we will let ourselves do because of our sort of like terrified need for respectability within the modern university. And yet in a field like anthropology, you've got people talking about the spirits they saw in the field, people writing from a decolonized perspective, the cultures they're studying, actually writing the spirit objectively. Like the ghost just walked into the room as an example. The ghost of so-and-so's daughter just walked into the room, rather than so-and-so believes the ghost just walked into the room. And theologians are always hedging the edges of these sort of extra material claims that we might make because we seem strangely more beholden to the patterns of modernity than non-theological disciplines are at this point. It boggles my mind. And I would say another thing coming out of the last 2 years is like, I've got to figure out how to be a theologian after this, because our patterns of thinking, writing, constructing, our paucity of creativity, like none of it matches the magnitude of what I have experienced in the last couple of years for trying to actually write the divine in any way that connects with that divine, which is what I was trying to do in that book. Now, when I look at transgressive devotion, I honestly, it feels quite naive to me. But people can still go and read it. Read it, buy it.
Actually, I think anytime a theologian gets enough distance from their book, they should have questions about what they did previously.
Yeah, it's true.
Let alone reading yourself after you relearn to read.
Yeah.
Like that is, it's hard enough when someone wants to talk to me about a book that I haven't read and you're like, yeah, well, it came out 2 years ago, but I kind of wrote it 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now you're asking me details about a text that, well, they're like, when you said, and you're like,
I said that? Did I really? Yeah.
How about you just ask me a question about it? I'll tell you what I'm thinking now.
Yeah.
The one of the things that made me think of that, like that question you're asking, like how you do theology if mind is ubiquitous in creation and not something maybe like that's unique to just human beings, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you aren't going to have like a reductive materialism and then humans are the exception that have mind because you only have a soul or something like that, then you're stuck with this question of it. If you're going to give an explanation of the emergence of mind, then whatever, and it's not a supernatural intervention, then it had to be a possibility contained within creation itself, from the beginning. And that gives you that sets up all sorts of different readings. But one of the ways I think we inheritors of modernity and its university system is historically Peter Harrison in his work, one of the major historians of the relationship of science and religion, points out that Protestantism went around chasing out all the spirits that weren't the church, essentially. And even within it, right? Get rid of the saints and iconography, that kind of thing. And even when they read scripture, you get to the reading of like straightforward reading, not all the different not like allegory and metaphor, all these other kinds of senses that existed in scripture for most of church history. And Peter Harrison points out that the hermeneutics of natural versus supernatural exist in historical criticism of the Bible before it's ever used to talk about nature in the sciences. That flattened hermeneutic Protestantism brought into scripture then gets transposed to how we read the book of nature. And now we inherit it, right? So in some ways, Protestant iconoclasm taught us how to read flatly. And what we did to the text to gain authority and control over the text, we've done to nature.
We've done to nature.
And to ourselves, right? Yep. So I think what you're getting at is really an area that's, ripe for new exploration for theology, because the scientific account of mind is getting much thicker. The anthropologists are pointing it out. And then if we look at our own history, we see, we helped teach the West to read reality this flat. And now we might need to undo it.
I'm often in the classroom being like, just so you know, this thing you want to fix, it's actually our fault in the first place. So we need to have a humble posture of repentance, and then maybe look within our own traditions for resources to combat it as well. Like, because otherwise I find we're borrowing from cognitive, which I'm all about interdisciplinarity, but borrowing from cognitive science, borrowing from anthropology, and then imagining there's some bridge we have to get over to be able to integrate these things with theology. But in our own DNA, we have so many other ways to be. We just are programmed not to take them.
Yeah, and theologians, I think, tend to be, on average, among the most disciplinary, transgressive people in a university system at the ability to engage in and feel comfortable deciding to engage a multiplicity of disciplines, as opposed to like having your discipline and a very narrow specialty within it. That's one of the things I really love about the interdisciplinary theology colloquium that Catherine Keller, does at Drew, is it sits there and it's like, what would it be like for a bunch of theologians to invite specialists in another discipline together, and we're just going to think out loud together and do it. Being in faculty that's primarily philosophy, that is not what happens. And scientists tend to be really special. So like you could be working with two different people who have projects with brain formation in utero, and they aren't wanting to really talk or engage the other one's work because they just feel like, well, that's theirs and it's too specific and I don't know all the details. And the theologian's just like, what do you mean?
Let's do it.
I just got to be halfway through a book about it before I can start playing with this. And
well, that's a good way to look at us. That makes me feel better. I like the positive spin.
Yeah. Okay. So you have the decision to go, having a healing prayer intervention. What was the journey and lead up to psychedelics? Because, and for people interested in it, do you feel, and if you haven't listened to some of the other interviews where people that study psychedelics and religion, feel free to go check them out. I'm sure Sarah Lane Ritchie and I've talked about it a couple times on the podcast. Rupert Sheldrake and I had a discussion about it before. So and it is a very much a live conversation. There are now degree programs in psychedelics, religion, or psychedelics and psychology and stuff showing up. And so I think that's generated more interest in it, especially as a lot of the brain sciences look at what goes on in a brain during those experiences being very similar to people that are practitioners of contemplative traditions, over a long time. So, anyway, tell us your psychonaut story.
Well, I had never been psychedelically curious. I had not been particularly psychedelically curious before this all happened. I did not use them in college or anything like that, mostly because I was scared of breaking my brain because of all the stigma around them. And then I broke my brain.
And then you taunted God into doing it.
And then I became a theologian, and that broke my brain instead. And it's interesting to think about just how much the use has been destigmatized just in the 2 years of my recovery. Because at the beginning, I was at church, and a man who is a therapist kind of pulled me aside and was like, they're using psychedelics now to treat brain injuries. And it was so hush hush. And I was like, I don't even know if he's like joking or being serious, but I feel like I can't have this conversation at church. And it kind of like, it went onto the back burner. And then maybe a year into my recovery, I would say that year midpoint was the most despairing moment. I started quietly Googling online, like terrified that someone was tracking my history. Like, just when I think back to the amount of stigma I felt around this, even just a year ago, I feel kind of silly, to be honest. But I was trying to just even figuring out what is and isn't legal was a terrifying kind of Google search. But then a little over a year into the recovery, when I started to have these issues with my legs and with walking, I got referred to this neurologist who's a specialist in this mind-body disorder that I have. And he said, really, the cutting edge therapy for it is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And he referred me for it. And so it was like all medical and legit, and I didn't have to be scared and stigmatized anymore. So I did this course but I mean, doing the course of treatment, I learned quite a bit about them and realized like the stigma around them. I'm talking to you about it now because I would want to do everything I can to break it, because this is the most healing thing I've ever experienced. I feel like my mind now, my mind body is sort of this wondrous place that I get to explore. And I've not ever felt like that in my life. And so I worked with a psychologist who is a specialist in working with psychedelics. We did a few weeks of preparation, which the work is intense. The work was really intense. Daily activity and journaling became a spiritual practice, meditation, prayer. She was wonderful at integrating my spirituality with the whole process and really talking openly about God and my relationship with God, my relationship with patriarchal religion. Yeah, my own spiritual experiences, what they look like, how they work. We talked about all the woo-woo stuff, and she was down with it. So it was about actually a month of preparing to start the journeys. And then I did 6 basically weekly journeys, which is a 4-hour-ish therapy session where I would arrive. We would spend the first hour-ish setting an intention for the time together. And then I would take ketamine, which lasts for about an hour. We played with dosage across the 6 sessions and really to find my sweet spot. I would quote unquote journey for about an hour. And then as I came out of the journey, I would do a therapy session. But all of these lines are incredibly blurred because you're still kind of tripping while doing the therapy session. And yeah, like the access to truth is still very much alive in that therapy session. It's sort of shocking how like in a regular therapy session, I might talk for months around an idea before I can bring it to consciousness. Whereas in these therapy sessions, everything was right there, ready to go, totally transparent to me and able to be put to words. Each session was totally different. It was bananas. Like I felt like the first 4 were training for the 5th. The 5th was definitely the most intense one. And then the 6th was like a nice little denouement resolution. Then there was some aftercare. And now I feel like I'll just be spending a lot of time sort of unpacking and working with everything I learned through the journeys. But I was constantly mapping. I was being continually put into a neuroplastic state to be able to remap the neural pathways that were not serving me well at all. And each week I did it, new possibilities arose very organically from inside myself that had not been there previously, like no grit and muscle. They arose. And then I, each week, had the choice to develop them or not. But again, it's surrounded with all this work, like daily meditation, journaling, processing. It was kind of a full-time job for 6 weeks. It's really lovely, but I wish it could be my full-time job. It was a lot of fun.
So if you were like going back to talk to yourself before you started the process, how would you have pitched it to yourself, knowing what the experience was like?
Well, honestly, like I was about to say, oh, honey, just do it. But this neurologist who I met with, he asked me what has helped me in the last year and a half of trying to recover. And I listed the neurofeedback, the brain video games had been incredibly helpful. Meditation had been helpful. Psychotherapy had been helpful, because one thing that can happen with a trauma, with a brain injury, is that trauma is, among other things, it is a loss of sense of self, as well as, it's a threat to life, and it can just be life as you know it. And so a brain injury is a trauma to the brain, but also an emotional trauma because you have lost who you are. And so in moments of like what I came to call cognitive blips in the classroom, for example, I had to train not to have a trauma response to those, which would send me into a panic attack, and be able to say, oh, I'm having a cognitive blip. That's a bummer. I have a number of strategies that I've learned from the occupational therapist on my team to deal with that. So psychotherapy had been incredibly helpful, which I don't think is always prescribed for brain injury recovery. And as I listed all the things that had been helpful and why, this neurologist said, okay, I don't actually recommend psychedelics for everybody. And that's probably important to say to your viewers, right? Like disclaimers, blah, blah, blah. I don't recommend it to everybody, but hearing the work that you've done in the last year and a half, I would say they will work for you, and nothing else is going to work at this point. You've come as far as you can go on your own, which makes you ready for them. And I think, the fear of the bad trip that people might have around psychedelics, that happens when you're not, being carefully cared for through the process. But also, like, to be able to get something out of them, you can't just like show up and take some drugs. There's like a lot of emotional work that goes into making this experience a therapeutic one. And I think, so what I would say to myself at the beginning of the journey would be like, just keep going. You're going to end up where you need to go. Because I think if I had just done them at the beginning, they might not have had as profound an effect.
You talked about like the decision to have someone pray for you, and in the context of a healing prayer, having this depiction of, oh, I thought this and this because of my work in disability theology, and then I have the baggage it's connected to charismatic upbringing but wanting to embrace it, and I have this kind of thing. Like, did the psychedelic experience and everything that kind of led up to it and processing it and stuff, did it feel extremely different, or did it feel kind of like parsimonious with the process of recovery, from spiritual experiences, life in the church, but also the kind of different kind of psychological work and psychotherapy, the getting to play video games with your brain? Like, did it feel integrated into that journey, or did it feel disjunctive in some way?
Well, I mean, I wasn't bringing like teenage Natalie religious trauma baggage to the psychedelics, so that part was gone. They're not particularly, heteropatriarchal and oppressive. I'm not like trying to disentangle. So I didn't have that part, which was lovely. It's a lovely way to approach something without heteropatriarchal baggage. But there was like the awareness that, okay, I'm doing something different now. This is like, I'm going to go under the influence. Like, yeah, I had a moment of like, who will I share this with? Certainly I won't go on homebrewed Christianity and talk about it a couple weeks after it's done. But like, my mom took me to one. That was amazing. Like, at the beginning, I was like, would I even tell my mom I'm doing this? The next thing I know, she's like driving me to an appointment. I've been fairly open at church about it. So I think once I got over the hump of the stigma around it and experienced it, and like want to now be a part of breaking the stigma around it, all of that kind of faded away. Like, the first day I showed up for my first one, the first journey, the therapist was like, so are you feeling nervous? And I was like, should I be? Like, I haven't really, yeah, I guess I should be, man. I'm about to do something that's like unlike anything I've ever done before. But I just wasn't. I was so excited by that point because even the prep work had been incredibly healing. So once I was in it, I was just up for it. And it did feel like an extension of the other therapies I'd been doing. But like they say, it's like you do 10 years of therapy in an hour. It isn't. It's a good little, it's like that moment in Mario Kart, where you hit the thing that like boosts you along. It's kind of like that. It's like Mario Kart.
But it's when you hit the arrow goes super fast, but you've just got the mushroom. So now you're...
I didn't even think of that. Someone loaned us a Nintendo Wii this week, so we've been playing quite a bit of Mario Kart. Because as I used the metaphor, I was like, but whenever I hit that arrow, I crash directly into a wall. And that is not what happened in this situation.
And that's why you should be guided by a professional in this experience. Like,
yeah. My 11-year-old next to me telling me how to do the curves.
Yeah, and you're like, hey, this is kind of like that time mommy took drugs for a month.
Well, yeah. I mean, how do you tell your kids this is what you're doing? Do you want to know how we did it?
Oh, I can't imagine. What if no, I want to move on.
Well, like breaking the stigma. And then I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to tell my children I'm about to do a ton of drugs? So we watched Black Panther, and we watched Black Panther take the medicines and visit his ancestors. And then, like, my youngest actually couldn't handle Black Panther. We had to stop. It was way too scary for her. So it wasn't like my best parenting move. But we did make it through the first time T'Challa takes the medicines. So then one by one, I took each of my daughters at different moments. And I was like, so do you remember when T'Challa took that medicine? And it kind of took him into a place inside his own mind where he got to see his ancestors and experience different kinds of like powers and healing. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, Mommy's going to do that for her brain. It's going to be a thing that Mommy does. And, their questions are like, are you going to become Black Panther? And I'm like, no.
Are you going to get a suit? Do you have access to vibranium?
You have vibranium, Mommy? Like, no, not like that. But then they did have funny questions like, well, do you think you'll see Granddad? And like, will you see your ancestors? And they were these beautiful conversations where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to see my ancestors. I have actually no idea who's going to show up when I go to that place. Like, but we can certainly talk about it after it happens and see. And they were lovely little companions. After a couple, there was 1 week after my middle daughter, we were in church and I felt my voice returning to me in a way that has been absent for a while. And after church, she was like, Mommy, you sang differently tonight. Your voice sounded different. And like there were a few comments from them that were like, you're different. Something is changing, that were very affirming, because like kids are going to tell you the truth. And yeah. But they liked that Mommy was doing the Black Panther medicines.
Yeah. Your mom's like a Black Panther. Yeah, I think one of the things that makes psychedelics so taboo, other than just the cultural things, but within a religious space, is the making. You can't be in control in that kind of spiritual experience, right? And I think that's why those of us that are mainline Protestants remain fearful of just like a song that might be enjoyable.
Well, I'm still scared of those.
I know some people enjoy them. I know some people enjoy them, but there is this sense of like when Protestantism and modernity centered the self as like the arbiter of reflection, be it here I stand or now I'm understanding the cosmos, right? And these kinds of things, it developed an infatuation of control.
Yeah.
And when I've talked to friends that have had psychedelic experiences, one of the things that kind of you hear across the stories are how freeing encountering the divine in a space where you no longer have control is. And so I wonder if you could share a bit about that and how that, like, how have you metabolized that experience, or where are you at metabolizing it for like your own self-understanding and understanding of the divine?
So after my first couple, I was having these really beautiful, profound experiences of thinking very deep into the depths of myself and really encountering myself. I encountered different versions of myself through these journeys and began to be able to parse out where different traumas have impacted and constructed these competing selves within me, and how to begin reimagining how to rearrange them into a version of, like, I began to see them as my self community, and one emerged to begin to sort of like be the conductor of these selves. But after a couple of these sessions, I was like, most people turn to psychedelics and then like start to believe in God. And I was finding I was losing my belief in God after the first couple of sessions. In one sense, like I was just, the infinite depths of myself were so fascinating. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's like, I don't have access to all of this version of me. Like, I just wanted to play around in that for a while. And then I wasn't feeling, and this is so, I've had a hard time explaining this to people. Like, I felt like oneness. I felt universal love. I felt like the sensation of being at one with all things. I felt the dissolution and falling into nothingness. Like, I felt all the things that people name as God when using psychedelics. And I don't know if I'm just super stubborn, but I was not experiencing any of those things as the divine. And so I said to my psychologist after a couple, like, I really want to have a divine experience. That seems like what everybody else seems to have. I'm like, do we need to up the dosage? Like, what can we do here so I see God? And she was like, oh, well, so I don't know how much validity to give to the statement, but she was like, you're on ketamine. Ketamine takes you deeper into the self, but it doesn't necessarily open portals onto the other. Psilocybin, which is mushrooms, that opens portals onto the other. Now, I've since talked to people who are like, no, I saw God while on ketamine. And so I don't know how much stock to put in that. I guess I'll have to try psilocybin. But I kind of stayed with that for a while and was like, okay, so what does God, because this really messes with my understanding of sanctification, like sanctification being like the ongoing process of becoming more like Christ and being made more in his image and divinized has like a material effect on the body. I'm an embodied theologian. If I'm going into the depths of my own mind body, even if that's not opening portals onto the other, there should be some God in there, shouldn't there? And it just seemed like there wasn't. So then I was like, oh my gosh, well, if I'm right about sanctification, I'm not even remotely sanctified. So that's a kind of shitty thing to discover under the influence. So but I was also super high, so it didn't bother me that much. But then I did in one session have what felt like an encounter with God. And it wasn't particularly nice, but it was wonderful. And it left me a little bit, but it's been coming back maybe in the past week or so. So I'm kind of new to processing it. But I found myself on this like dirt road with like the wind just blowing around me everywhere. And I was screaming at God, do you love me? And I felt so fully myself in that moment and so honest. And I really didn't care what his answer was. I just wanted him to be honest enough to answer me truthfully. And this was the week that it was my highest dose week, I think. And so I kept falling beneath consciousness. And so I would keep then dropping off the road back into unconsciousness and then appearing on the road again to start the process over again. And when I would catch a glimpse of God, he was a he in this playing out that I was doing, where he would look at me with like such utter disregard, like totally didn't give a shit. And I was screaming at him, like, do you love me? Do you love me? Answer me, do you love me? And it happened again and again and again. There are a few moments where I felt just his look towards me rush through me in a way that, Trip, I don't know how to make sense of it yet. Rush through me in like bearing witness to everything that was good and bad in me and not necessarily differentiating between them, just kind of holding it all, but not in a way that felt particularly lovely. None of this felt very nice, like it's supposed to feel, like they promised the psychedelics will feel. It really just felt like coldly factual. And then I came out of it. And I don't really know if this was, like a manufacturing of my own psyche, if this was really the divine encountering me in a specific way, if it was my false self encountering God and being released. One friend has pondered, was this God being, like God protecting me from seeing his fullness? Because so I'm miming this and nobody can see what I'm doing. In this scene, God was always just sort of like had his back to me, looking over his shoulder at me. Like couldn't even be bothered to look at me directly. And so this friend was like, maybe God's protecting
like Moses, God
Yeah.
only showing the backside.
This is how my brilliant theological friend wanted to interpret it and how I wanted to interpret it too. But it's like, it didn't feel like God was being like loving, protecting of like me being destroyed by his presence. There's honestly like a quality of indifference to it. The amazing thing about psychedelics, one of my journeys, I relived the most traumatic night of my life in a very calm state and got to move through everything that happened that night with a sort of equanimity that could heal each moment of that night. And yeah, there's an ability to stay present to the horrific when you're under the psychedelic influence. And so I'm not particularly bothered. Like even as I'm hearing the words come out of my mouth, I feel like I should be saddened by God's indifference to me. But it feels like there's some truth in this. And now I need to spend a little while figuring out what that truth is. And I kind of feel like I'll come out on the other side still a person of faith, no matter what that means. But I mean, again, That's not a thing I'm supposed to believe as a liberal feminist, progressive theologian, that I could still be a Christian if God doesn't give a shit about me.
Well, you know what's fascinating about that is now I haven't done psychedelics and had that kind of experience, but you know how when random images can kind of just take root?
Mhm.
And in my nighttime routine, like I'll do reading with the kids and stuff, and then if I have to do other things, but before bed, there's usually some kind of contemplative prayer type thing, and once or twice a month something shows up, and sometimes I just fall asleep, and it varies. But I read the whole Chronicles of Narnia to the kids earlier this year, and there's that refrain throughout it where there are these expectations of the kids for a kind of tenderness from Aslan they don't get.
Yeah.
And then early books, they remind them, look, he's not a tame lion. He's not a tame lion. And then towards the later ones, they then become the stewards of going like, no, he's not tame.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have these expectations of what an encounter with the divinity looks like that are kind of oriented towards our needs as we understand them. And then we are expecting a kind of tenderness where the Aslan characters wanting them to push through, to like take their own responsibility and ownership of something, or to take the lead and to act. And and the refrain back isn't Aslan doesn't care, but to the ones that have gotten to know Aslan, they're like, he's not tame. You're wanting this to be tame and safe. That's just not what this is. It's bigger than that. And like in my contemplative prayer, like there's a couple places I go where I'm like sitting in, I guess, the lap of God. I don't know. I mean, it's a giant lap. Can't see the face.
Do you actually see and feel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. See, you're perfect for this.
And so when I said like, and I'm sitting there in it, and all I start hearing, like, it's like all of a sudden Lucy shows up in my contemplative, he's not tame, right? It's not a tame lap. And I'm like, no, I want it to be tame. And it's not tame. And it was after that kind of experience that then I started doing like therapy around trauma and doing MDR therapy and deciding to address it, because I think there was this whole sense in me of like, what am I protecting God by not addressing this and voyaging into it? And so then what was I expecting? I wanted a tame God, one I could understand, make sense of, articulate, and have confidence in.
Yeah.
And it was just weird, right? You're reading the whole series over, 4 or 5 months with the kids, and just watching how that the wisdom of, oh, he's not a tame lion, show up. And then it triggers this whole contemplative experience that then made me go, oh, there's whole parts of my experience I protect God from because I want a controlled, tender, loving one and not tame. But I'm uncomfortable with the fact that that's what I'm being invited to walk into. That's what was resonating with me when you heard it. No, I don't want to project, but like that feeling.
No, I always cry at those points.
C.S. Lewis, I usually cry reading Tolkien. I thought I'd matured, but they wanted to read it, so.
Well, I had recently finished reading through them all with my middle daughter, and it's every time that her and I will both get just very emotional every time they're saying he's not tame. It's such a brilliant line. I think, I suppose I'll have to do something at some point with this vision of an indifferent God, given that I have already worked with this image of the God with dementia. Why not? But it was a very strange thing to encounter. Yeah, because it seems mean, and it was a beautiful, sort of, I guess, a beautiful thing to be encountering towards the end of this recovery journey. I hate calling things journeys, but the recovery journey, because it had messed so much with sort of the progressive notions of God I had come to hold. Like, wow, we're really going to mess with it now. It's like, doesn't even really care that much about you. Can't even be bothered to turn around. Yeah.
Here's Tripp's self-wrestling with this, is because I've had my kid look at me and say, well, do you even care?
Oh, yeah, mine started saying that. My youngest has been saying that lately.
And I'm sitting there, and and part of what I'm saying is like, I do care, And like what I'm caring about is I want you to see just how capable you really are, because I know you are, and you're wanting me to fix this.
Trip, you're gonna make me cry. Come on, man.
But you
That's
feel
the
this
word I
impotence,
needed.
right, as a parent, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, I want to fix it for you, but I also know if my friend was asking me this, I would ask them, well, is this a chance for them to grow into a bigger
Yeah.
self? So it's not ultimately kind if you do it for them, and yet you really want to, because how could you not, right? Like you just think, like I remember sitting there in that moment going, yeah, but Jesus is the one that said, if you ask for bread, are you going to give him a rock? Come on. And
Yeah.
and I had this feeling of going like, you already have plenty of bread to eat. You're missing the entire point. And it's still a very live thing. Like I don't think I've processed it enough. And if you weren't telling stories, I don't think I would have put it on the internet. But they'll be distracted by the fact that you're talking about doing drugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Taking medicines, I believe, is what we call it.
Okay.
Well, I felt a little weepiness come there, because it felt like you were having what we in the charismatic communities would call like a word for me, because a lot of my Protestant categories got kind of messed with, well, I've never been super Protestant on sanctification, so that's probably why I was getting messed with there. But this sense, like a refrain that came to me, because sometimes you'll get, words in these experiences as well, was, I have everything I need and I know how to use it. That was one of the gifts that came. Like this whole thing, this functional neurological disorder I have is very much about your mind stripping agency away from you. And so part of the recovery journey is restoring agency. And so in these different journeys, it was really important for me to be able to find and use the resources that were at my disposal each time I began to encounter something troubling. And this became the refrain: you have everything you need, I have everything I need, and I know how to use it. Felt really important in these situations. But then I would come out of them being like, but I'm supposed to be dependent on God. Like, I'm not supposed to have everything I need and know how to use it. I'm supposed to be leaning on the divine in my weakness. Like, if I am in these situations where the message that I'm getting from God is, no, you are self-sufficient, sweetheart. Like, you're like the Enlightenment white male. Don't you worry. You're totally self-contained. You don't need me or anybody else. It kind of felt wrong. Like, this is not what the depths of my mind or the divine are supposed to be teaching me. I'm supposed to be learning about interdependence. And so I still, like, I'm puzzling with that, but there was something about like standing on that dirty, dusty road with like the wind was swirling my hair. And for some strange reason, I was a blonde, which I'm not, which my spouse thinks maybe I was imbibing She-Ra, because I really do love the reboot of She-Ra. As this was happening, I actually thought I might have been like imbibing one of my dear friends in the moment. I don't know. I think I was drawing on just like the circle of feminine wisdom standing before this patriarchal God. But yeah, this idea that I am self-contained and self-sufficient kept coming at me, palpably true. I have to figure out how to integrate that with faith now, as someone who spent a couple of decades dismantling that particular vision of the self because of how fraught it is in terms of patriarchal conditioning, colonization, whiteness. I mean, all these lenses that have pushed me to try to dismantle that understanding of the self. Now, that's what comes to me under the psychedelic influence and feels incredibly empowering. I've got to figure out how to hold those pieces together under the non-recognition of the divine, I guess, to make sense of it all. Because again, they're just messing with my categories. And I'm obviously not going to come to the table now and say, man, the patriarchal, conservative, white dude Christians were right all along. It's actually, this autonomy is the way.
Because you could read the experience like with a kind of Carol Gilligan lens around her structure of care, right? Because she's talking about, when she's thinking about like kind of feminist ethics, introduces interdependence and empathy and relationality, and that care becomes the imperative for the good life. And, in some of the examples, she talks about how but care is contextual. And so like what care looks like to an infant is dependence. and what care looks like in the process of growing up, is the part of those thresholds is when care enables the parent to say, you got this, right? Like, that's like the succeeding thing. Like, oh, are we a more powerful parent if we force our kids to do homework, behave, blah, 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 or we care for them such that they internalize a love of wisdom and a care for the neighbor and those kinds of things. And how that image she goes of how like care brings thresholds where now their new responsibility of interdependence is there. And part of the problem of patriarchy is it imagines independence as a virtue as opposed to responsibility within interdependence. And that kind of formation of care can be experienced in a host of different ways. And it's often like when we re-narrate our coming of age, where the same line from a parent at one point, no, you got this, is like, what's your problem? No, you're supposed to do this. But like then later in life, you're an adult and you're your own kid and you're like, oh, well, if mom hadn't ever said you got this, then I would still be dependent in that way, right? So there's like all these layers of it, and I think that those issues show up in profoundly different ways when you're a parent. That like I could imagine if I, like, before I was a parent, hearing me say this and be like, what the hell? What are you talking about?
Yeah, so non-parents, don't judge us right now.
Yeah. 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 And if you want to understand real theology, you have to be a parent.
No,
Natalie is a natalist.
No.
Natalist Natty says, take drugs, have kids, and then you can talk about God.
Only then.
Only then. Until
Only
then, hush, hush.
Shh. Especially if you're a lady.
Yeah, especially if you're a lady. Yeah. I mean, honestly,
please don't
feminist theologians take drugs. God's a dude.
Someone's gonna soundbite that and Twitter harass me.
If someone is an hour and a half into this episode and then soundbites that as their takeaway, their hermeneutics for life is one where they're looking for issues, and they probably need a therapist.
Okay.
So,
person about to soundbite me on that, I pre-forgive you. Go in peace.
Oh, your preemptive strike of grace right there.
Sucker.
Yeah, watch out. So you mentioned a bit about like having shared the experience with your kids as best you can where they are and things. How has being vulnerable about your recovery process and that changed the way you share your life and are vulnerable with your kids in general?
I mean, one of the things that's quite remarkable about these psychedelic assisted psychotherapy practices is they did sort of these assessments before and after of sort of like distressing things that can go on in my mind. And I would have a lot of ruminating thoughts. This is why these are used for treating treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, for sure. I would have a lot of ruminating thoughts all the time. My mind was always busy. But of course, because that's the only mind I'd known, I wasn't aware of how busy it was. And as I went through the weeks of the treatments, my mind just got quieter and quieter and quieter, almost like it became sort of a blank space that I could move around in and have agency to decide what to do with it while I was in it. And so this has an impact first just on how thought works and then also on presence to other people. And so in terms of thought, I mean, like at one point I was talking with my therapist about this, saying like, I don't know how to summon thoughts anymore. I have to relearn because I usually have 100 thoughts going in my head and I can just grab one of them and go with it. Now when there's not 100 thoughts, I get to like go. It's sort of like that like scene, the white scene in like The Matrix or The Good Place or any other sci-fi kind of thing where it's like the scene where you go to computer generate reality. It's like, oh, I got to go into the drawers of my mind now to bring stuff up. And I can choose which drawers to go into because there's not 100 people standing in front of them shouting at me not to open the drawers. Learning how to think with that has been just like the total trip. What that means also is like, I feel like I can hear better when I'm with somebody now. I can sit still for longer. I can feel more of what's happening underneath a conversation with somebody. And so now the people in my life might say, no, you can't. You still like suck at all these things. I don't know. I don't know. But there are like these moments where I'll be explaining to my spouse, like, I'm feeling like I have such patience now. And he's like, are you really? Are you sure you're feeling that? It's like, I'm glad you're feeling that on the inside. Now let's talk about the outside. But it does feel like I'm having these little glimpses, I would say, especially with my spouse and my kids, where it's like just these, it's the new neural pathways, just these avenues for different options of ways to interact open. And there's the responsibility then to choose them. It's just as easy still to choose the old path of getting annoyed, overreacting, being selfish, whatever. But I can feel the branch happen where I can go a different way. And that's been really magical with the kids. Like a couple of weeks ago, I realized my youngest daughter, who is 7, I have never danced in a rainstorm with her. Her sisters have experienced that, and I remember them loving it, and she hasn't. And I just thought, Natalie, crappy mom. One of your kids hasn't danced in a rainstorm yet, which is like maybe a silly thing to have in your bingo card of like crappy moms, but it's like obviously indicative of a much larger thing. Like this kid was 2 when COVID hit. She was like 5 when her mom's brain broke. Like she's a remarkably fun child for how bad I've been at showing up in fun ways for her. Then last night it started to rain and I was like, Amy, get down here. And she came outside and she grabbed an umbrella and I was like, no umbrellas. And she was like, you're going to go in the rain without an umbrella? And I was like, oh, baby, you don't know. Like, it's way more fun to go in the rain without an umbrella than to go in the rain with an umbrella. And her whole face just went like, what is happening? And like I just grabbed her hand and we ran into the street and we just like jumped in it was a torrential downpour. We were soaked through like in seconds. And she just kept screaming, this is so much fun. And then she started screaming, it's like you're not even responsible anymore. Like, you not responsible is way better. And so when I don't even know where she comes up with this stuff. So we went back into the house and her sister was like just coming down the stairs and was like, what were you guys doing? And Evie starts screaming at her sister, Mommy's just not responsible anymore. And it's amazing. And I was like, oh yeah, we've had a couple of years where when it starts raining, I start thinking like, I don't know, I've got to like close the window, or like all the things to survive, because I've been in a like impoverished state of survival for 2 years. And I got to look at rain last night and go, oh, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for to splash with Evie so that she doesn't get too old for that. And I think that's what it's opened up. It's like I felt in my mind at that moment, it's bedtime in 20 minutes. If I take her in this rainstorm, it's going to be hell getting her to bed. Gonna have to do a shower. Like, we're not great at washing our kids. Like, this is not gonna be a pretty scene. This is also my opportunity to play in the rain with Evie. Let's just pick that one instead, because that was not presenting itself to me as an option for a couple of years. That's the change.
Oh, that's awesome. It's beautiful. And this is another public service announcement. You should all go dance in the rain.
Oh, yeah.
High quality experience if you have kids. And obviously half of you are now becoming a parent on your homework after you do drums. Those are the other things Natalie's told you to do. But we were in lockdown in Scotland and never been there, which gives you ample opportunity to do all sorts of things in the rain, which if you lived in Los Angeles before that, kids, saw more rain in the first week in Scotland than the 6 years in LA before that. So once you get used to it, it's not that weird, No. You're like, well, why? What's the point of having a backyard if you only use it the 50 days it's not raining?
Wow, when you lived in Scotland, you managed to get 50 whole days of no rain a year. That's incredible.
Oh, I heard it was a very dry year in lockdown. They're like, it was a dry year.
That's like a dry year.
That notion of play though, that was already theologically significant to you.
Well, this is the thing. It was very theologically significant to me, but that doesn't mean I was very good at it.
Right.
It's same like the mind-body connection was very important to me theologically. And I don't think I've learned I was not very good at that either. I thought I was good at it. What it turned out was I had this ridiculous mind-body disorder that's trying to destroy me. Like, that's not the way I want to be good at embodiment. I've been writing about agency for 20 years. It turns out I've been on this journey now to rediscover my agency. Like, I had all the theoretical frameworks for this stuff, which admittedly have been incredibly helpful through the process. Like, I've been very grateful, and I'm very lucky to have an incredible therapist who can like let me nerd out on theories of agency while we're talking about attempting to recover mine. Having all of that background was helpful, but it's a little embarrassing to discover that as a human being, I know very little about the things that it seems I'm supposed to know a lot. Like, ostensibly, I know a lot about these things, and yet it seems I know nothing. So it's been cool to learn it at the visceral level.
Well, that I imagine any honest theologian, given how much we talk about God, is very familiar with being able to talk about things you have very little understanding of.
Well, we write what we don't know, I guess, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, we write about what we hope to know.
Yeah.
And then there's like that bit of like at some point, and you're not aware of it, everything you're putting down in words is at best doxology, because its traction with ultimacy is parted ways ago.
Yeah.
But how has this experience changed the way you understand your vocation?
Yeah, that's a biggie. I teach Christian theology, and I have always been incredibly doctrinal, have like a very high respect for institutions and institutional Christianity, actually. Like, I know I do a lot of critique with it, but the framework of institutional Christianity is very... Sorry, an alert just came up on my phone letting me know that Dante's Inferno is soon due to my library. So I just had to click that away as I'm talking about institutional.
Oh, no, that sounds a dangerous book to read around with psychedelic spaciousness.
But I also teach in a multi-religious interspiritual seminary where we're training spiritually integrated psychotherapists. So I work with Christian ministers and then multi-religious spiritual psychotherapists. And I suspect, coming out of this with feeling a lot more flexibility around doctrine. I've always loved the rules because the rules can be played with, broken, adapted, redeployed in different ways. That's what I was doing in transgressive devotion. It was like submitting wholly to all the doctrinal rules to see what we could do with them. And the rules have a bit crumbled for me after this. And when I'm in institutional church, I feel the presence of this patriarchal Christianity differently in my body now. And I've got to tease that out a little bit. My relationship to Christianity is changing, and I don't totally understand it yet because the directions it seems to be going are modes that I have consciously chosen not to go before. I've never been one. I've always said I'm religious, not spiritual, just to be, again, sort of contrary rather than spiritual but not religious. But I'm coming out of this feeling a bit more fragmented relationship to the Christian traditions, feeling more of a fluidity between them and other spiritual traditions, but yet still having an ethical commitment to embrace difference in a way that honors the difference, not to go into this grab bag of spiritual preferences either. So I'm feeling a little bit adrift and kind of really curious because I've been on this medical leave. This will be in September, my first time back full time at Emmanuel, where I teach, where I will not just be teaching and supervising my doctoral students, but will be in faculty meetings and part of institutional life. I have always resisted just sort of thinking in terms of a pan-spirituality where everything gets integrated, because my main concern there is not the purity of Christianity, but more so the ways in which Christianity then just tries to absorb other religious traditions sort of in ad hoc ways that colonizes them. And so I don't want to go that route. So I've got to figure out an expansiveness around Christian faith that is ethical. I mean, I'm resisting the language of authentic just because I don't like that language either. But like I said, it's just over the past 2 years, it's sort of everything I thought I believed sort of fails me. It's a helpful foil for whatever's next. But working with students who are training to be spiritually integrated psychotherapists, it seems to me our students should be like at the forefront of the work with psychedelics. Like they are already learning how to integrate their spiritual traditions with therapeutic practice. You probably know about the organization Ligare. It's a Christian organization that does work with psychedelics, headed up by Hunt Priest, who was in the Johns Hopkins study on ministers and psychedelics. This is a really beautiful organization that's doing work around this. And yeah, I think we need more Christians thinking about how to integrate our spirituality with these kinds of experiences, because they really are profound.
Hey, you talked about this shift of, before kind of taking the tradition as given to then play with it or transgress it and such, and then having both like a greater openness and a kind of a more valuative stance towards the particular doctrines and such within the tradition. Has the transitions and transformations taken place led you to cherish particular parts of the Christian tradition that you may have not given as much attention to, or a part of it that is stickier in your imagination as you've kind of transformed?
It feels less, it's not like before I would have said my relationship to the tradition feels very rigid. I wouldn't have said that. But it feels so much less rigid now that I think it kind of, like I said, it's like having a new mind. It feels like a rebirth. I just turned 47 and we threw a rebirth party for me. Another kid-appropriate, midlife-appropriate rager in our house to kind of bracket the one where we discovered the concussion 2 years ago, because it has felt like rebirth, this new mind to work with, this new way of being in the world, this new experience of the world to work with. And so when I'm in church each week, I'm feeling strangely disconnected because sort of the traditional forms aren't speaking to me in the same way anymore. But then something will happen that feels just so intimate, because, like, I love your language of cherish. I find myself able to cherish something surprising in a new way because the immediacy of it is so palpable. It's a little bit like the encounter with Teresa in Rome. I went afterwards and read her autobiography, read work by her. And it was like, when you read your friend's writing and it's like, oh yeah, I recognize this voice, but really I know my friend and this is their writing voice. It felt like that when I was reading Teresa afterwards. I felt like I had encountered her as we both worshiped God together. And then the writing was something separate from her. It feels like there's something of that kind of attention happening for me in worship now, where a scriptural story or just a set of words in the liturgy or a way that we move will take on a new kind of freer meaning, even as the rest of it seems like sort of heightened in how much it annoys me. Because oh my gosh, this is just so rigid. It feels so constraining and containing, rather than what I felt before, which was it creates this safe container for play. Now it just feels like a container, except when there are these moments of surprising immediacy. I'm trying to hang on to those because I would really like to keep going to church.
In what, how Teresa's divine showings, there's the initial report, and then there's the longer version as she continued to reflect on the experience over time.
Isn't that Julian? I think you're talking about Julian.
Or is it Julian?
You just mixing up your female mystics.
Well, they were all in the same semester, so it is.
You really can't fit anyone on week 10 of a syllabus. Anyone will do.
Yeah. If they got saint in front of their name, and they say slightly erotic things about Jesus,
then it's all good.
That came up in prayer. That one,
yeah, that one.
But that practice of both.
They all had headaches.
The experience articulating, how they articulated initially, but there's this Father Sam who I took the class with. He said often the gift of the encounter is never just the encounter itself. It's one that continues to give, over time as you return to it. And you've talked a little bit about processing experience and thinking about it, and you talked about having having an intimate experience with a saint in Rome, I wonder, have any of these experiences become more significant or been transformed just in your kind of return to them, reflecting on it? Especially as you start to try to tell it, right? That's one of the things, you have the experience. How many mystics never told them, let alone told them, had it assessed whether, is this real, and then kind of unpack it more over time?
Well, I can tell you, I've learned a lot from them just having this conversation with you. I was going to say, like, not only do I feel like you should do psychedelics, I kind of feel like you should do the training to accompany people, because I have found this conversation. Thank you. I found this conversation to have opened up and shifted a number of these stories for me. And I think that is the gift of something that happens deep, deep inside. First of all, it's so lodged in there that it takes time to integrate its way from that deep place to the surface and all of the spots in between. Yeah, it's like they kind of twist and turn in the light and take on new meaning depending on what time of day's light is hitting them, I guess. I don't know if this metaphor is working at all, but the Teresa one for sure. I think the story of God on the dirt road for sure takes new meaning every time I tell it. And it's funny, like, as people respond to the stories as well, I feel such a visceral sense of like, nope, it's not that. Like, whatever you said first to the God story on the road, I was like, nope, it's not that, but thanks for your input. And then when you started, the second thing you said, I was like, oh yeah, no, I think it's that. Like, there's some facet in there is that. And I couldn't have come up with that on my own. So there's something here in this, like, if we're going to play with this sort of autonomous, self-sufficient image, it doesn't begin to unfold into sense-making until other people interact with it as well. So thank you for being one of those people.
Oh, well, this has been a lot of fun. I had way too much fun in lockdown when we were talking, and was all disappointed, and it didn't get to happen. I had no idea that the concussion would lead to all these experiences, and listening to it, I can't decide if I should be glad you've had the experience or not.
Oh, I know. I am.
Okay.
I don't know if you get to be.
Because
that feels wrong, but
yeah. You know what I mean? Like where there's clear fruit from it that would be hard to say you would choose a life without it, even though.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was really awful. I cannot emphasize that enough. They were dark, dark days. Yeah, and again, it's like nothing I would ever impose on anybody else. And I would never say that anyone else needs to make this much meaning, this kind of meaning out of an experience of suffering. But I'm at the point in the journey where I am grateful for it. I mean, I would never have known I had this neurological disorder if I hadn't had the concussion kick it into high gear. I mean, if we can public service announcement for a second, they're increasingly coming to think that people who suffer from long concussion probably have some pre-existing condition like this functional neurological disorder that the concussion sends into hyperdrive. And that's why so with long COVID on the scene, so many more people are experiencing these neurological issues after a concussion in ways that we just haven't seen before. But you have to slow down a lot to be able to see that. You have to take the pause to actually be able to discern what's happening to you rather than pushing through it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what if I not asked that I should? Is there something where I'm not intuiting the right question to give the best account for someone trying to overhear our conversation about your experience?
What is the question that you haven't asked? Like, I feel my response to that, I feel sort of bubbling up as like if someone is sitting trying to decide if this is for them, I don't want to do anything. Like, I don't want to get sued. But I would just say, at the very least, my hope would be for destigmatization around these kinds of practices. Because I'm not the only person I've witnessed come back to life receiving these kinds of therapies. And I think there's a lot that Christians can do to stand in the way of their accessibility, and likely will do because of fear around altered states and a desire for control of the mind body. And so I think those are really astute to say, like, the fear around these is a fear of a loss of control. And the thing is, the second that the second that you're under their influence, that's the last thing you're worried about. Like, I remember slipping under in one and being like, this is my ego dying. This is the moment where I might die. I wonder what it's going to be like. Like, it just pure curiosity. And of course I wasn't going to die. It was my mind tricking me into it. And because this loss of control, I think that, I mean, not to go all 1960s, but I do think that there's potentially like a bit of a cultural revolution that could happen if more people just let themselves lose control, experience timelessness, sought a position of wonder that they haven't otherwise allowed themselves to experience. And my hope is that Christians would be on the side of diminishing control, wonder, and timelessness. Those feel like things we should be all about.
Yeah. There's advice specific to you intended. There's no prescriptive account here. It was a description. Natalie's experience,
description,
and and it's experience that will get described differently as she shares a story and reflects on it. So this is just a moment in time, especially if you're a college student. Don't tell your parents. Well, I was talking to these two theologians.
Oh, I don't think college students should be doing it. Michael Pollan says these are, I will actually quite comfortably say don't. Michael Pollan talks about how these are a post-midlife drug that are wasted on the young. These are an intervention that are incredibly helpful for those of us who have rigidified our neural pathways into harmful patterns, to loosen those up and let us be youthful again, to rechart the second half of our life. So still, legally not recommending them for people in the second half of their life, but actively not recommending them for 20-year-olds.
Yeah, if you aren't even 25 yet, your frontal cortex is still very porous, and it's not even organized enough to make real big habits of ridiculousness that you need to move beyond. So you got to finish making poor decisions, all on your own.
Your mind is already in this state. Just enjoy that.
Yeah.
We're just doing this to get our youth mind back.
Yeah. But you can't go to Rome and enjoy the art and have a spiritual experience.
Pray.
You can go on a you can go on a big hike with your friends.
Yeah.
Just
Sit
you
in
gotta
silence.
wait. You gotta get older. You
gotta get older for the good
then
stuff.
you get to do the good stuff. When you become transparent to your finitude and go, I got less left than I have, then, but not before. Not before.
I'm pretty
So
sure
then you just got to deal with finitude on your own.
That in those second half of life books, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it was not us, but Richard Rohr who said you should go and do psychedelics.
Yeah, Richard Rohr endorses it. Natalie, not.
Not so much.
And definitely not Emmanuel College.
Don't say that. Definitely not Emmanuel College.
No,
we're just
her place
making sure.
of employment.
Yeah.
We're just explicitly stating that.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for
and
explicitly
if you
stating
are
that.
going to do it and are trying to talk to your kids, show them Black Panther.
Black Panther.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ideal gateway to explaining what mom's doing.
Yeah, on Friday afternoons while they're at school.
You're at school, mommy's talking to the ancestors.
Yes, I'm with my ancestors.
Or God on a dirt road, but getting a little disgruntled.
Yeah.
With if you take psychedelics and see God, and you've already written hundreds of pages complaining about patriarchal religion, and God's not only a silent treatment, you got to be in the second half of life to enjoy that.
You have to be at least approaching 50.
Yeah.
Nobody in their 20s should do that.
No gray, no go. You got to have those first ones start coming out, then you can.
Yeah. That's fair. Yep. That's a good disclaimer. Thank you. I'm glad we're not legally covered.
Yeah, it's totally true. I'm sure lawyers are like, man, that was thorough.
It was thorough. We could not have done that better ourselves if we tried.
I know. That's what they come here for. Theologians giving legal advice.
Yes.
We got to protect ourselves. They might. Well, I don't want to get sued. They might take my microphone.
No.
I know.
I don't want to get sued. That sounds horrible.
So I'm glad that's clear. So have you decided what you want to work on next?
Well,
like writing wise.
Yeah. I am writing a memoir that I was writing. This is just another funny thing. I was working on a memoir before I got the brain injury and got amnesia and forms of dementia. And now I'm back to working on this memory book, which is a thing. But it's actually about walking the Camino and pregnancy and labor narratives intertwined with each other and thinking about how memory functions in these thin spaces of experience and existence. So I'm cracking on with that this summer now that I'm able to write again, which is super fun. Yeah, that's the big project right now.
What was it like to read what you had already written after your time off of being able to read? Like, were you reading in third person, or did it feel like your own voice? Like, what was that like?
It's a mix. It depends on it depends on the piece that I'm reading. Getting back into the memoir was very strange because I'm not very good at outlining things, but I have a very, very solid outline for this book, which I'm very grateful for because some of the amnesia that I've experienced means I have lost some of these memories. So some of the sections now are being written from old notes, which are now jogging my memory, of course. But I mean, it definitely messes with like any good memoir has a theory of memory operating inside of it, and so to experience amnesia in the middle of writing a memoir is a very strange experience. So it did when I returned to it feel very third person. And part of when it takes you multiple years to do a project, obviously your voice changes across those years. But again, having this 2-year experience in the middle of this project, I had about 2/3 of it written before I got the brain injury. I feel like such a different person returning to the writing now that I've had to go back through and try to reconstruct voice, playing with voice and trying to reimagine what voice will be like as I write this last part and then re-infuse that voice into the earlier sections. It's definitely changed the project for sure. Nothing like having 50,000 words already done and then losing your brain. It's humbling.
I definitely think it, I don't know, the story makes me want to read it. So,
yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And then obviously, I wrote all of the 6 journeys except the first one. I came home and wrote them within 3 hours of them taking place, so still slightly under the influence, and I did them as pure free writing activities. So I have all the journeys written and anticipate I'll do something with them at some point, but there's a lot of trauma, a lot of very matter-of-fact trauma in a psychedelic journey, so I've got to tease out what's actually possible to do with those, but I would love to pick up a project around the psychedelics for sure.
Excellent. Well, this has been a blast, Natalie. I really enjoyed talking to you. At some point when we hang out in person, I'm sure it will be fun.
It will
which
be.
Isn't true about every academic I interview.
I like to be on the fun side of academics. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.